Could you survive in the woods if something that hunts like a man begins to copy your every footstep? 7 Oregon hunters discovered survivors whose sanity fractured after finding their own boot prints, perfect replicas, leading them in circles through the forest, prints that stopped at sunrise. Why did those who escaped keep scanning the tree line, unable to speak about what followed them home? The things in Oregon's deep woods don't want rescue. They want familiarity, and once they learn your patterns, the hunt becomes personal. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share this story. For years I kept it locked away in the back of my mind, trying to convince myself it was just exhaustion, or maybe some kind of hallucination brought on by being alone in the wilderness for too long. But the older I get, the more I realize that what happened to me in those woods wasn't something my mind created. It was real. And it's something I'll never be able to forget. My name is Garrett, and I've been hunting in Oregon my entire life. Grew up in a small town just outside of Eugene, spent most of my childhood tagging along with my dad and uncles on hunting trips through the Cascade Mountains. By the time I was 16, I could track a deer better than most grown men. Hunting wasn't just a hobby for me. It was in my blood. In the fall of 2019, I decided to take a solo trip deep into the Willamette National Forest. I'd been planning it for months. Wanted to get away from everything, you know. Work had been stressful, my relationship was falling apart, and I just needed some time alone in nature to clear my head. So I packed up my gear, told a couple friends where I'd be camping, and headed out for what I thought would be a peaceful week in the woods. The drive out there was beautiful. Towering Douglas firs lining the road, fog rolling through the valleys, that crisp autumn air that smells like pine and wet earth. I felt good. Excited even. I parked my truck at a trailhead about 15 miles from the nearest town and hiked about 6 miles into the forest before setting up camp near a small creek. The area was remote. I hadn't seen another person since I left the parking lot, and that's exactly what I wanted. The first 2 days were perfect. I spent my time hiking, tracking elk, and just enjoying the silence. There's something about being that deep in the woods that makes you feel small, but in a good way. Like all your problems back home don't matter anymore. But on the third night, something changed. I was sitting by my campfire, cooking some beans and sausage over the flames when I heard it. A sound that made every hair on my body stand on end. It started as a low hum, almost like someone was humming a tune far off in the distance. But there was something wrong with it. The melody was off. Discordant, like whoever was humming couldn't quite remember how the song was supposed to go. I stopped eating and listened. The humming continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. I sat there in silence, straining my ears to hear anything else, but there was nothing. Not even the usual sounds of the forest. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant owl calls, just silence. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was probably just the wind moving through the trees in a weird way, or maybe some animal I wasn't familiar with. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That sound was human, or at least it was trying to be. I didn't sleep well that night, kept waking up every hour or so, listening for that humming sound again. But it never came back. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. I spent the 4th day hunting, tracked a small buck for a few hours but never got a clean shot. By late afternoon, I was a good 3 miles from my camp, deeper into the forest than I'd been before. The trees were thicker here, the canopy so dense that even though it was only 4 in the afternoon, it felt like dusk. I decided to head back before it got too dark. That's when I found the tree. It was a massive old-growth cedar, probably 8 feet in diameter at the base, but what caught my attention wasn't the size. It was what was carved into it. Someone had taken a knife, or maybe an axe, and carved dozens of symbols into the bark. They weren't random scratches either. These were deliberate, intricate. There were spirals and what looked like faces with hollow eyes, and strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long. And at the center of it all, about chest height, was a single word carved deep into the wood. Stay. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This wasn't some kid messing around. Whoever did this spent hours, maybe days, carving these symbols. And they'd done it recently too. The exposed wood was still pale, not weathered like it would be if it had been there for years. I backed away from the tree, my hand instinctively moving to the rifle slung over my shoulder. That's when I noticed the silence again. That same unnatural quiet from the night before. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just me and that tree and those symbols staring at me like they were trying to tell me something. I started walking back to camp, faster than I probably should have. Kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following me. But there was never anyone there. Just trees and shadows. When I finally got back to camp, the sun was setting. I built up my fire bigger than usual. Told myself it was because it was going to be a cold night. But really, I just wanted the light. Wanted to be able to see anything that might be out there in the dark. I was heating up some coffee when I heard it again. The humming. But this time it was closer. Much closer. And it wasn't just one voice anymore. It sounded like multiple people, all humming that same broken melody in unison. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once, surrounding my camp in a circle of discordant noise. I grabbed my rifle and stood up, pointing it into the darkness beyond my firelight. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice sounded small and pathetic in the vastness of the forest. The humming stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the underbrush. They were circling my camp, staying just beyond the reach of my firelight. I could see shapes moving between the trees, tall and thin and wrong somehow. Like they were people, but not quite. Their movements were too fluid, too synchronized. "I'm armed," I yelled, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want any trouble." One of the shapes stepped closer, just barely into the edge of my firelight. I saw a glimpse of a face, pale, gaunt, with eyes that reflected the fire like an animal's. But it wasn't an animal. It was a person. Or it used to be. Then they all started laughing. Not a normal laugh. This was high-pitched and manic, like children laughing at something cruel. The sound bounced around the trees, echoing and overlapping until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. I fired a shot into the air. The laughing stopped immediately. The shapes melted back into the darkness. And then, once again, silence. I didn't sleep that night. Sat with my back against a tree, rifle across my lap, feeding the fire every time it started to die down. Kept telling myself that as soon as the sun came up, I'd pack my gear and get the hell out of there. Didn't care about the rest of my trip. Didn't care about the elk I'd been tracking. I just wanted to leave. When dawn finally broke, I packed up my camp faster than I ever had in my life. Didn't even bother with my tent. Just stuffed it in my pack and started hiking back toward the trailhead. I'd made it maybe half a mile when I found them, hanging from the trees. Dozens of dead animals. Deer, rabbits, birds, even a bear cub, all strung up with rope, their bodies positioned in strange poses, arranged in a circle around the path. And in the center of the circle, drawn in what looked like blood, was that same spiral symbol from the carved tree. I ran. Didn't think, didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could through the forest. Branches whipped at my face. My pack bounced painfully against my back, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. Because behind me, I could hear them. The humming had started again, and this time there were footsteps too. Lots of them, running, chasing. I don't know how long I ran. Felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 minutes. When I finally burst out onto the trailhead, gasping for air and soaked with sweat, the sound stopped. I looked back at the tree line, expecting to see them emerge from the forest, but there was nothing. Just trees and silence. I threw my gear in my truck and drove straight home. Didn't stop for gas, didn't stop for food, didn't stop at all until I was back in my apartment with the door locked and all the lights on. I reported what I'd seen to the Forest Service the next day. They sent a ranger out to investigate, but they never found anything. No carved tree, no dead animals, no signs of anyone else being in that area. They said I probably got turned around, maybe saw some natural formations that looked like something else in the low light. Basically implied I'd made the whole thing up or had some kind of breakdown, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I can still hear it. That humming, that broken melody that doesn't quite sound human. And I wonder if they're still out there, deep in those Oregon woods, waiting for the next person who wanders too far from the trail. I haven't been hunting since. Can't bring myself to go back into the forest. My friends think I'm crazy, that I just had a bad experience and need to get over it. But they didn't see those faces, didn't hear that laughter, didn't feel the absolute certainty that something in those woods wanted me dead. Whatever's out there in the Willamette Forest, it's not human, not anymore. And if you ever find yourself hiking those trails and you hear humming in the distance, my advice is simple. Turn around, don't ask questions, don't investigate, just leave. Because if you stay, if you follow that sound deeper into the woods, you might find out what happened to all those people like me who went into the forest and never came back. And trust me, you don't want to know. I need to tell you something that happened to me 7 years ago in the deep woods of Oregon. I've never fully shared this story because, honestly, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me, but I'm tired of keeping it locked away. What I experienced out there changed everything I thought I knew about what's possible in this world. And the worst part, I still don't have answers. I'm still not sure what I encountered that October weekend, and that uncertainty haunts me every single day. My name is Michael, and I've been hunting in the Pacific Northwest since I was 12 years old. My father taught me everything: how to read the land, how to move quietly through the forest, how to respect what we hunt. I've spent countless weekends in those woods. I know them better than I know my own neighborhood, or at least I thought I did. That October, I decided to take a solo trip. Just me, my rifle, my backpack, and the forest. I had a favorite spot about 8 miles deep into the Cascade Range, this little valley where the deer congregated in the fall. I'd been there dozens of times. The hike in takes about 3 hours, and the area is remote enough that you rarely see other hunters. That was part of the appeal. Pure solitude, pure nature. Just the way I liked it. I left on a Friday morning around 6. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, maybe 40 degrees, that crisp autumn air that makes you feel alive. I had my map, my compass, my GPS, all the modern tools mixed with the old school skills my father had drilled into me. I felt confident, maybe overconfident. The hike in was uneventful. I moved at a steady pace, checking landmarks, making sure I stayed on my usual route. By 9 in the morning, I was deep in the woods, the kind of deep where the cell phone signal completely disappears, where the only sounds are your footsteps, the wind through the trees, and the occasional bird call. I love that feeling, that complete disconnection from civilization. I set up camp in a small clearing near an old logging trail that nobody really uses anymore. I built a basic shelter using some branches and my tarp, gathered firewood, and settled in. The plan was to spend Saturday hunting, then head back out Sunday morning. Simple, safe, routine. That night, I sat by my fire, made some coffee, and watched the darkness settle over the forest. There's something about being alone in the wilderness that makes you reflective. Your mind wanders. You think about your life, your choices, your place in the world. I remember feeling peaceful, completely at ease. But around midnight, something shifted. I was lying in my sleeping bag, drifting off to sleep when I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, but it wasn't. It was a sound, a kind of low rhythmic thumping, like something heavy moving through the forest. My instinct kicked in immediately. Bear. Had to be a bear. But the sound was wrong somehow. Too deliberate, too methodical. I grabbed my flashlight and my rifle, crawling out of my shelter to investigate. The forest around me was pitch black except for my small fire, which was almost completely burned down. I aimed my flashlight in the direction of the sound. Nothing. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, listening. The sound had stopped. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was nothing. An animal spooked by my presence, moving away. That was the logical explanation. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, my mind alert, my body tense. Every small sound made me jump. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted but relieved. The daylight made everything feel normal again. Rational. I decided to get up early and start hunting while the light was good. I made coffee, ate some granola, and by 6 in the morning, I was moving through the forest with my rifle. The sun was just starting to peek through the trees. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. I moved carefully, scanning the terrain for deer, checking the wind direction, doing everything by the book. Around 8, I found fresh tracks, deer tracks moving through a small ravine. I followed them carefully, keeping downwind. This was the part I loved. The hunt itself, the focus, the connection to the ancient ritual of it all. My pulse quickened. I was close. Then I heard it again. That same sound, the heavy thumping. But this time, it was different. It was closer, much closer. And it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from ahead, from the direction the deer tracks were leading. I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. My hand tightened on my rifle. In my 15 years of hunting, I'd seen bears, mountain lions, moose. But I'd never felt fear like this. This was different. This was primal. Something in my gut was screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. I decided to investigate. I know that sounds stupid in retrospect, but curiosity got the better of me. I moved forward slowly, quieter than I'd ever moved before, my rifle raised and ready. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died down. Everything was silent except for that rhythmic thumping, which was becoming clearer the closer I got. The ravine opened up into a small clearing, and what I saw there made my blood go cold. There was something in that clearing. I couldn't quite make sense of it at first. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. It was roughly humanoid in shape, maybe 7 feet tall, but the proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too long, too thin, like they were stretched. And the way it was moving? It was hitting something against a tree repeatedly. That's where the thumping was coming from. It was using what looked like a bone, a massive bone, maybe from a moose or an elk, to pound against the tree trunk, over and over again. Thump, thump, thump. The creature's head was bent downward in this focused, concentrated way, like it was completely absorbed in this task. I couldn't see its face clearly because of the angle and the shadows, but I could see this mottled grayish skin that seemed almost hairless. And where its arms should have ended in hands, there were these long, spindly fingers that didn't look quite right. They bent in ways that fingers shouldn't bend. I stood absolutely still. I wasn't even breathing. My rational mind was trying desperately to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was a person, some hermit living in the woods. But no, no one looked like that. No one moved like that. The creature suddenly stopped what it was doing. It went completely rigid, just like I was. And then slowly, it turned its head toward me. I couldn't see its face. I still can't, not really. But I felt it. I felt its attention focus on me with an intensity that was almost physical. In that moment, I understood what it meant to truly be afraid. Not scared of getting hurt, not scared of danger, but afraid on a fundamental, cellular level. The kind of fear that your ancestors felt when they realized a predator had seen them. I did something then that I'm not proud of. I ran. I turned and I ran back the way I came, not caring about stealth or tracking or any of the skills I'd spent a lifetime developing. I was just running. My lungs burned, my legs pumped. I didn't look back because I was too terrified of what I might see behind me. I made it back to my camp in record time. I grabbed my backpack, threw everything into it haphazardly, and started making my way out. But I was panicked, and I made mistakes. I lost the trail. I was crashing through the forest, going in what I thought was the right direction. But I wasn't sure anymore. The panic had scrambled my sense of direction. For what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, I stumbled through the woods. I was lost, completely, utterly lost. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I saw it again. The creature was standing on a ridge about 50 yards away, just watching me. It wasn't chasing me, it was just observing. And I got the distinct impression that it was studying me. Like I was interesting, like it wanted to understand what I was. That's when something even stranger happened. The creature tilted its head, and I heard this sound come out of it. Not a growl or a roar or anything animal-like. It was more like a voice. a deeply inhuman voice that almost formed words. It didn't make any particular sense, but I heard it. In my bones, I heard it. I ran again, and this time I was running in pure panic, completely uninhibited by thought or logic. By some miracle or pure luck, I stumbled onto an old trail. Maybe not the same one I came in on, but a trail nonetheless. I followed it downhill, moving faster than anyone should move through forest terrain. I fell several times, scraped myself up, but I didn't stop. I kept going. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, I saw civilization. I saw the edge of the forest, the old logging road beyond it. I burst out of the trees, and I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, which was parked about 2 miles away at the trailhead. I drove out of there without looking back. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove straight to the ranger station and told them what I'd seen. They were skeptical, of course. They suggested it was probably a bear, maybe a mountain lion, something I'd misidentified in my panic. But they took a report. They organized a search team. They sent people out to my camp, to that clearing where I'd seen the creature. They found nothing. No evidence of anything unusual. No bones, no tracks, nothing. They did find my camp intact and undisturbed except for what I'd left scattered. They found my hunting rifle by the tree where I'd dropped it in my panic. The official conclusion was that I'd suffered a panic attack, that I'd misidentified an animal and my fear had made me see something that wasn't really there. Stress-induced hallucination combined with genuine animal encounters. That was their explanation. I've tried to convince myself they're right. I've gone over that day 1,000 times. Maybe they are right. Maybe I did imagine it. But here's the thing. I still have the scratches on my arms from running through branches. I still have the backpack with the torn straps. And I still have the memory of that creature's attention focusing on me, of that inhuman voice speaking words I couldn't quite understand, but somehow understood anyway. I never went back to those woods. I haven't hunted since that day. Whenever I think about going back, I feel this overwhelming sense of wrongness, this certainty that something is still out there, waiting. And I can't shake the feeling that it's not just in those woods. Sometimes on quiet nights I hear that sound again, that rhythmic thumping, and I wonder if it followed me out. I wonder if it's still looking for me. Because here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. That creature wasn't hunting me. It wasn't trying to kill me. It was studying me, and I keep thinking about that sound it made, that thing that almost sounded like language, and I wonder what it was trying to say. I wonder if, somewhere out there in the Oregon wilderness, there are more of them, and I wonder what they want. I still don't have answers, and maybe that's the most terrifying part of all. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to share a story like this. Honestly, I still don't sleep right. But maybe putting it out there will help someone else avoid what happened to me in those woods. Or maybe it'll just serve as a warning to stay the hell away from certain places in Oregon. My name's irrelevant. What matters is that I'm an experienced hunter. Been doing it since I was 12 with my old man. By the time this happened, I'd logged over 15 years in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. I knew how to track, how to stay quiet, how to read signs in the forest. I'd camped alone dozens of times without incident, but nothing prepared me for what I found in the Cascade Range that October. It started simple enough. I'd planned a solo elk hunting trip about 40 miles southeast of Bend, deep in the Deschutes National Forest. The area was remote, barely marked on most maps, perfect for someone looking to get away from the usual hunting crowds and tourist trails. I packed light but smart. Tent, sleeping bag rated for freezing temps, enough food for 5 days, water purification tablets, rifle ammunition, knife, first aid kit, standard stuff. The drive took about 2 hours from my place. I parked my truck at an old logging road that hadn't seen use in probably a decade. The Forest Service map showed a few trails nearby, but I planned to go off-path. That's where the big elk hide. The first day was perfect. Crisp autumn air, golden light filtering through the Douglas firs and ponderosa pines. I hiked about 6 miles in, setting up camp near a small creek. The sound of running water was calming. I spent the afternoon scouting, found some decent tracks, saw a few does. Nothing unusual. That night, sitting by my small fire, I felt completely at peace. The stars were incredible out there, away from any light pollution. I could see the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. I remember thinking how lucky I was to experience this kind of solitude. Around midnight, I crawled into my tent and fell asleep almost immediately. The sound woke me around 3 in the morning. At first, I thought it was an animal, a shuffling noise maybe 30 feet from my tent. I lay there listening, hand instinctively moving to the rifle beside my sleeping bag. The shuffling continued, irregular, not like a deer or elk moving through underbrush, more deliberate. Then it stopped. I waited in the darkness, barely breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a curious raccoon or maybe a black bear passing through. I'd dealt with both before. No big deal. But sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I checked around my campsite. No tracks, no scat, no sign of any animal having been nearby. The ground was soft enough near the creek that something should have left prints. But there was nothing. I shook it off and headed deeper into the forest. By noon, I was about 3 miles from camp, following a game trail that wound through increasingly dense timber. The forest here felt different, older. The trees grew thicker, their branches creating a canopy so dense that sunlight barely penetrated. The temperature dropped noticeably. Even the birds seemed quieter. That's when I found the first one. Hanging from a low branch about 7 feet off the ground was a deer, a young buck, maybe 2 years old. But it wasn't the deer itself that stopped me cold. It was how it was hanging. The animal had been gutted completely, organs removed. But the cut wasn't rough or jagged like a predator would make. It was precise, clean, almost surgical, and the deer was suspended by what looked like thin wire wrapped around its antlers, pulled so tight it had started to cut into the bone. No blood on the ground beneath it. None. I've field dressed dozens of deer in my life. You can't do that without blood going everywhere. But the forest floor under this animal was completely clean, like someone had caught every drop. My hands started shaking. I raised my rifle and did a slow 360 scan of the area. Nothing moved. No sound except my own breathing, which had gotten faster. I should have left right then. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, go back to camp, pack up, and get the hell out. But stupid pride, or maybe just disbelief, kept me rooted there. I took out my phone to get a picture, but of course, no signal. I was too deep. I made myself keep moving, telling myself it was probably some sick poacher's handiwork. People do crazy things. Maybe it was meant to scare other hunters away from their spot. But 30 minutes later, I found the second one. Another deer. This one, a doe. Hung the same way, same precise gutting, same lack of blood, but this one was fresher. I could tell by the eyes. They hadn't clouded over yet. Whatever did this had been here recently. Very recently. The forest felt like it was closing in around me. The silence had become oppressive. I realized I hadn't heard a single bird or squirrel for the last 20 minutes. In a forest this alive, that kind of silence means something's wrong. Prey animals go quiet when a predator's nearby. I started back toward camp, moving faster than I should have, making noise, not caring any more about stealth. I just wanted to get back to my tent, grab my gear, and leave. That's when I heard the whistling. It came from somewhere to my left, maybe 100 yards away. A human whistle. Not like someone calling a dog, but a tune. Slow and deliberate. Almost cheerful. Completely out of place in that silent forest. I froze mid-step. The whistling stopped. Then it started again, but now it was behind me. I spun around, rifle up, finger near the trigger. Nothing but trees and shadows. The whistling continued for another few seconds, then stopped again. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't call out. Something told me that would be the worst possible thing to do. I started moving again, faster now, almost jogging. The whistling followed me. Sometimes ahead, sometimes to the side, sometimes behind. Never close enough to see the source, but close enough that I knew something was tracking me. When I finally burst into my campsite, gasping and sweating despite the cold, the sun was starting to set. Golden light slanted through the trees, My tent stood exactly as I'd left it, but my campfire, which I'd made sure was completely dead before leaving that morning, was burning, small flames licking at fresh wood that I hadn't put there. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, rifle raised. Someone or something had been in my camp, was probably still watching me right now. "Who's there?" My voice came out shakier than I wanted. "I'm armed. Show yourself." No response, just the crackling of the fire and my own ragged breathing. I should have run, should have left everything and just bolted for my truck. But I needed my keys, my phone. They were in the tent. I approached slowly, rifle sweeping left and right. Nothing moved. I crouched down and unzipped the tent. Everything inside had been arranged in a perfect circle. My sleeping bag, my backpack, my extra clothes, my food. All of it laid out in a precise geometric pattern. And in the center was my knife, standing straight up, driven into the ground. I grabbed my keys and phone from my pack, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I didn't bother with anything else. I backed away from the tent, keeping the rifle up, scanning the darkening forest. That's when I saw him, or it. About 50 feet into the trees, standing perfectly still, was a figure. Tall, very tall, maybe 7 feet. It was hard to tell in the fading light and through the dense timber, but what I could see made my blood turn to ice. It was human-shaped, but wrong. The proportions were off. Arms too long, head tilted at an angle that didn't look natural, and it was just standing there, watching me. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it smiled. I saw its teeth even from that distance. Too many teeth. All wrong. I ran. I don't remember most of the run back to the truck. I know I fell at least twice, scraping my hands raw. I know I lost my rifle somewhere, dropping it when I stumbled. I know the whistling followed me the entire way, sometimes right behind me, so close I could feel breath on the back of my neck. When I finally reached the logging road, my truck was sitting there exactly as I'd left it. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, picked them up, got the door open, started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, I could see the edge of the forest, and standing just beyond the reach of my taillights was that figure, still watching, still smiling. I drove. I didn't stop until I hit Bend, nearly 2 hours later. I went straight to the sheriff's office. They listened to my story, took notes, said they'd send someone to check it out. I could tell they thought I'd either been drinking or had altitude sickness or something. They humored me, but I saw the look they exchanged. A week later, they called me. They'd sent deputies out to the area I described, found my camp, found my tent and gear. Everything was still arranged in that perfect circle, but they didn't find any hanging deer, no wire, no blood, no evidence of anything I'd described. They did find something else, though. About 100 yards from my campsite, they found a small clearing I'd never seen. And in that clearing were 7 trees, all in a circle. And hanging from each tree was a piece of clothing. Old clothing. Some of it looked decades old, rotted and weathered. But on one tree, hanging from a low branch, was a hunting jacket. Recent, maybe a few years old at most, with a name stitched on it. The name belonged to a hunter who'd gone missing in that area 3 years ago. They'd searched for weeks, never found a body. Eventually listed him as lost to the elements. The deputies asked if I wanted to file an official report, make it part of the record. I said yes. They closed the file a month later. Insufficient evidence to investigate further. I haven't been back to those woods. Won't ever go back. I'm thinking about quitting hunting altogether. Every time I step into a forest now, even ones close to home, even in broad daylight, I feel like I'm being watched. And sometimes, late at night when my house is quiet, I hear whistling outside my window. I never look, because I'm terrified I'll see that smile again. There are places in the Oregon wilderness where the trees grow so thick and so old that sunlight barely touches the forest floor. Places where hunters go missing and nobody asks too many questions about what happened to them. I know this because I was one of those hunters, and what I saw out there in those deep woods changed everything I thought I knew about what could exist in the world. It was October of 2019 when my buddy Marcus and I decided to take a hunting trip up in the remote areas near the Cascade Range. We'd been hunting together for almost 15 years, and we thought we knew every trick the wilderness could throw at us. We were confident, maybe too confident. We told our families we'd be back in 4 days. We almost made it. The drive up took about 6 hours from Portland. The deeper we went into the forest, the fewer signs of civilization we saw. No cell service, no other hunters, no sound except for the wind moving through those massive Douglas firs and hemlocks that must have been hundreds of years old. There was something about that silence that got under my skin right from the start. It wasn't the normal quiet of the woods. It felt heavy. It felt intentional, like the forest itself was holding its breath. We set up camp near a clearing about 2 miles off the main logging road. Marcus wanted to push further in, but I convinced him to stay in a place where we could still see the sky. I'm glad I did, though it didn't end up mattering much. We had our tent, our supplies, our rifles, and our confidence. We sat around the fire that first night, drinking coffee and talking about the elk we were going to find, the stories we'd tell back home. Around midnight, I went to bed. Marcus stayed up for another hour or so, keeping the fire going. I could hear him moving around outside the tent, and it was comforting in a way. Having someone else there made me feel less alone in that vast darkness. I fell asleep to the sound of the fire crackling. I woke up at around 3 in the morning. Something had pulled me out of my sleep, though I couldn't figure out what. The tent was dark. Marcus was already asleep beside me, snoring softly. I lay there for a few minutes, listening, trying to understand what had woken me. That's when I heard it. It was a sound I'd never heard before. Not quite a scream, not quite a howl. It was something between animal and human, and it seemed to come from somewhere deep in the forest, maybe a quarter mile away. It lasted for about 5 seconds, and then it stopped. Everything went silent again. Even the wind seemed to die down. I nudged Marcus awake. He groaned and asked me what was wrong. I told him I'd heard something strange. He told me to go back to sleep, that it was probably just a cougar or a bear, that animals make weird sounds sometimes. He was right, of course. Animals do make weird sounds. But this wasn't any animal sound I'd ever heard before. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there in the dark, listening to every sound the forest made, branches creaking, small animals rustling through the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl. Normal forest sounds, but underneath all of it, I kept waiting for that other sound to come back. It didn't, not that night anyway. When morning came, Marcus and I packed up our gear and headed out into the woods. We were looking for elk, focusing on the areas where we'd seen tracks and sign in previous years. The day passed without incident. We saw plenty of deer, some fresh elk scat, but no actual animals worth hunting. By late afternoon, we decided to head back to camp and try again the next day. On our way back, Marcus pointed out something that made my stomach turn cold. There was a tree about 30 yards off our path with something carved into it. We both walked over to get a closer look. It was a symbol carved deep into the bark. Not a hunter's mark or anything I recognized. It was almost like a cross, but the lines were too sharp and angular. The bark around it looked old, like it had been carved years ago, but there was something about it that felt wrong. I asked Marcus if he'd ever seen anything like it before. He said no, and suggested we keep moving. We made it back to camp as the sun was starting to set. The shadows between the trees were growing longer and darker, and that heavy feeling from the first night had returned. We cooked some dinner, ate in silence mostly, and tried to act like everything was normal. But we both knew something had shifted. The forest didn't feel welcoming anymore. That night, the sound started around 2 in the morning. Not just the one sound this time. Multiple sounds. There were voices, or what sounded like voices, coming from different directions around our camp. They didn't sound human exactly, but they weren't animal either. They were low and guttural, almost like they were coming from deep underground. Marcus was awake now too. We both sat in the tent, frozen, listening to these sounds moving around us. One of the voices came so close to the tent that I could feel my heart stop. It stopped right outside, maybe 6 feet away. I could hear it breathing, heavy and wet. Marcus grabbed his rifle. The voice made a clicking sound, like something clicking its teeth or mandibles together. Then, slowly, the sound moved away. We heard it moving through the trees, and then other voices responding to it from different parts of the forest. I wanted to pack up and leave right then. Marcus talked me into waiting until morning. He said that we were safe in the tent, that whatever it was probably wouldn't come inside. I'm not sure he believed it any more than I did, but we stayed. Neither of us slept. We just sat there in the dark, listening to those sounds moving around us throughout the night. When the sun finally came up, we made a decision. We were going to leave. We'd come to hunt, and we'd failed, but neither of us cared about that anymore. All we wanted was to get out of these woods and get back to civilization. We started breaking down camp, moving as quickly as we could. We barely spoke to each other. The fear had become something tangible, something we could both feel pressing down on us. As we were finishing up, I noticed something that I still can't fully explain. The trees around our camp had changed. There were marks on them, gouges in the bark that definitely weren't there when we arrived. They looked like claw marks, except they were massive. Some of them were as wide as my hand, and they were high up on the trees, higher than any animal I knew of could reach. Marcus saw them too. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed his backpack and started walking back toward the logging road. I grabbed mine and followed him. We made it maybe half a mile before we heard the voices again. But this time they weren't distant. They were right behind us. We started walking faster, then jogging, then running. Our packs were bouncing on our backs, and branches were whipping at our faces. I could hear things crashing through the forest behind us, moving through the trees like they weighed nothing. Then Marcus fell. He really fell hard, tripping over a root or a log and going down face first. I stopped to help him up. That's when I saw it. There was something standing about 30 feet away, partially obscured by the trees. In that moment, I couldn't fully process what I was seeing. It was tall, much taller than any man. Its skin, or what I could see of it, looked gray and almost translucent. The outline of it seemed to shimmer and shift, like it was hard for my eyes to focus on it properly. Its face, if it was a face, had too many angles. The proportions were all wrong. Marcus screamed. Really screamed, this primal sound of absolute terror. He scrambled backward, away from me, away from the thing. I grabbed his arm and we ran. We didn't look back. We just ran. I'm not entirely sure how we made it to the logging road. It's all kind of a blur of trees and rocks and the sound of our own breathing and something massive moving behind us. But we did make it. And when we broke through to the road, we both kind of collapsed for a second, just breathing, our hearts pounding so hard I thought they were going to burst out of our chests. Marcus's truck was parked about a mile up the road. We stumbled toward it, half walking, half running. I kept expecting to hear that sound, those clicking teeth sounds, coming from the forest behind us, but we didn't. The forest had gone silent again, that same heavy, intentional silence as before. We threw our stuff in the truck and drove out of there. We didn't say much on the drive back. Marcus kept the radio on, turned up loud, like he needed to fill the silence with noise. When we got back to Portland, we went straight to Marcus's house. His wife asked us what was wrong. We lied and told her we'd had engine trouble on the truck, that we'd turned back early. For weeks after that, we didn't talk about what happened. It was like some kind of unspoken agreement between us. But eventually, we did talk about it. Not in person, through text messages late at night. Marcus told me he'd been having dreams about that thing. He said sometimes in the dreams, it was standing at the foot of his bed. Sometimes it was whispering things to him in that clicking language. I had dreams too, but mine were different. In my dreams, I could see what it actually looked like. And it wasn't just one creature. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, living deep in those forests, living there for who knows how long, existing in a part of the world that humans rarely venture into. Marcus wanted to report it. He talked about contacting the Forest Service or the state wildlife people. But report what exactly? That we'd seen something weird? That we'd heard weird sounds? We both knew how that would go. We'd be written off as crazy, or as hunters who'd gotten scared. And part of me wondered if reporting it would be a bad idea anyway. like maybe drawing attention to what was out there would be worse than just leaving it alone. A few months later, I read a news article about a hunter who'd gone missing in the Cascades. His name was David Chen. He'd been reported missing after he didn't return from a hunting trip in an area not too far from where Marcus and I had been. The search and rescue teams looked for him for weeks and never found a trace. No body, no equipment, nothing. It was like he'd just vanished into the forest. I showed the article to Marcus. He didn't respond for a long time. Then he sent me a message that just said, he went too deep. The truth is, I don't know what we saw out there. I've tried to rationalize it 100 different ways. Some kind of large, undiscovered animal. An elaborate prank by other hunters. A hallucination brought on by fear and lack of sleep. But none of those explanations feel right. None of them account for what I felt in that forest. That sense of presence. Of something ancient and vast and completely indifferent to human life. I've never been back to those woods. Marcus hasn't either. Sometimes I think about going back, about trying to find that symbol we saw carved into the tree, about documenting it or studying it. But then I remember that sound, and I remember that shape moving between the trees, and I stay home. There are places in the Oregon wilderness that were never meant for human beings, places where things that shouldn't exist do exist. I know this because I was there. And I'm still trying to figure out what I saw. I need to tell you something that happened to me about 3 years ago, and honestly, I've been struggling with whether I should even share this story. But the more time passes, the more I realize that keeping it bottled up inside isn't helping me sleep any better. So here it is. This is the story of the worst weekend of my entire life, and it all started with something as simple as a hunting trip. My name is David, and I've been hunting in the Oregon wilderness since I was 12 years old. My father taught me everything: how to read the land, how to move silently through the forest, how to respect the animals we hunted. For 30 years, I've spent at least a dozen weekends every fall in the deep woods of eastern Oregon. I know those forests like most people know their own homes. Or at least, I thought I did. The weekend it happened was mid-October. The weather forecast looked perfect. Cold mornings, crisp air, and clear skies. My buddy Marcus texted me on Thursday evening asking if I wanted to head out that weekend. Marcus and I have hunted together for nearly 15 years. We know each other's rhythms in the woods. We trust each other completely. So of course I said yes. We met up Saturday morning at around 4:30, just as the first hints of gray were starting to creep across the eastern sky. We drove to our usual spot, a remote area about 40 minutes from the nearest town. The trailhead was completely empty, which wasn't unusual for that time of year. Most hunters stick closer to the main roads where access is easier. We packed our gear and started hiking in around 6 in the morning. The forest was absolutely silent. I mean the kind of silence that feels almost unnatural. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the branches, no distant traffic or planes. Just the sound of our boots on the forest floor and our breathing. Marcus noticed it too. He kept stopping and listening, which he never really does. "It's quiet," he said around 7 in the morning. "Yeah," I replied. "Too quiet." We both laughed it off, the way you do when you're trying to shake off a feeling you can't quite explain. But that feeling stayed with us as we continued deeper into the forest. We hiked for about 3 hours, moving steadily uphill toward the ridge we usually hunt from. The trees were massive, old-growth Douglas firs and hemlock that had been standing for probably 200 years. The forest floor was thick with needles and moss. Everything felt heavy and dense and somehow oppressive, even though the forest is usually my favorite place in the world. Around 9 o'clock, Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. I nearly walked into him. "Do you see that?" he whispered. I looked ahead to where he was pointing. About 50 yards away, there was something hanging from a tree branch. At first, I thought it was a deer carcass left behind by another hunter. But as we carefully approached, I realized what we were looking at was something far worse. It was a mannequin. A full-sized, realistic-looking male mannequin, completely naked, with its arms spread wide and a length of rope tied around its neck. The rope led up and wrapped around the branch above. The mannequin's head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was mid-hang. The plastic face was painted with exaggerated features, a wide, grotesque smile with what looked like black marker for eyes and mouth. What the hell? Marcus breathed. We both stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at this impossible thing in the middle of the forest. There was no logical reason for it to be there. No reason at all. The nearest town was miles away. There were no cabins or structures nearby. No camping area. This thing had been deliberately carried or transported into the deep woods. Maybe it's someone's sick idea of a joke, Marcus said, but his voice was shaky. Maybe, I said, but I didn't believe it. We should have left right then. We should have turned around and hiked back to the truck and gone home, but instead we did what seemed logical at the time. We took some photos with our phones, documented what we'd found, and we kept going. We told ourselves we'd report it to the ranger station on the way out. The rest of the hike to the ridge took another 2.5 hours. We didn't talk much. The forest around us felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The silence continued. I didn't see a single animal all day. Not a bird, not a squirrel, not even an insect. The forest had shut down somehow, like it was holding its breath. We set up our camp on the ridge around noon. We found a good spot with clear sight lines down into the valley below. The weather stayed perfect. Cold, but not uncomfortable. No wind. The sky stayed clear and blue. We settled in to wait and watch, which is mostly what hunting is. Waiting and watching and hoping. But I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to that mannequin hanging from the tree. Who put something like that in the middle of nowhere? Why would someone go to that effort? Was it some kind of warning? That thought kept creeping into my head no matter how much I tried to push it away. Around 3 in the afternoon, Marcus fell asleep. His head dropped back against the tree he was leaning against, and his breathing got deep and steady. I sat there watching the valley, watching the shadows get longer as the afternoon wore on. That's when I noticed something moving down in the trees below us. At first, I thought it might be a deer. I grabbed my binoculars and looked through them. What I saw made my blood go cold. It was a person. A man, I think, though I couldn't see clearly enough to be sure. He was moving through the forest below us, and he was moving with purpose. He wasn't hunting. He was walking deliberately between trees, and he seemed to be looking at something. Looking up at the trees themselves, examining them. I watched him for a couple of minutes, and then he just stopped. He stood perfectly still in a small clearing, his head tilted back, and he looked like he was looking right at us. Even though I knew logically that he probably couldn't see us from that distance, the sensation that washed over me was pure primal fear. I reached over and shook Marcus awake. "There's someone down there," I whispered. Marcus jerked upright, instantly alert the way hunters are trained to be. I handed him the binoculars and pointed down into the valley. He looked through them for a long moment. "I don't see anything," he said. I looked back down. The man was gone. "He was right there," I said. "He was just standing in that clearing." "Maybe it was just a shadow," Marcus said, "or a bear standing up." But we both knew what we saw, or what I thought I saw. The sun started to set around 5 o'clock. The temperature dropped fast, the way it does in the mountains. We packed up our gear and started the hike back to the truck. Neither of us wanted to stay the night anymore. Neither of us had to say it out loud. We just started moving. The hike back should have taken about 5.5 hours. We knew the trail. We'd walked it 100 times. But something was wrong with the forest that evening. Every trail looked the same. We'd pass landmarks we recognized and somehow end up in places we didn't expect. Our GPS wasn't working. Both our phones showed no signal, and the compass kept spinning wildly. After what felt like way too long, we ended up back at the clearing where the mannequin was hanging. "How did we get back here?" Marcus asked, panic creeping into his voice. "I don't know," I said. We looked up at the mannequin, and then we both saw something that made our blood freeze. The rope around its neck was no longer attached to the branch. The mannequin was standing upright on the ground, and the rope was just hanging from its plastic hands like it was holding it. The grotesque painted face seemed to be smiling even wider than before. "It was hanging," Marcus said. "It was definitely hanging." "I know," I said. We didn't wait to understand what was happening. We just started walking, fast. We weren't even following a trail anymore. We were just moving downhill, trying to get out of those woods. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps behind us, crunching on the forest floor, coming toward us. We started walking faster, then jogging, then running. We were thrashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, drawing blood. The footsteps kept pace with us. Or maybe there were more than one set of footsteps. It was hard to tell. It sounded like the forest itself was chasing us. We burst out of the trees onto the road where we'd parked. The truck was there, just where we left it. We threw our gear in the back and Marcus got the engine started. I looked back at the trail entrance just as the last light of day was fading. There were at least a dozen figures standing at the edge of the forest watching us. They were mostly obscured by shadow, but I could make out their rough shapes. Some of them were perfectly still. Some of them were moving slightly, jerking and twitching in ways that didn't seem natural. Marcus hit the accelerator, and we got out of there as fast as the truck could go. The drive back to town was quiet. Neither of us said much. When we got to the ranger station, it was closed. We were going to go to the police, but when we pulled up to the station, the officer who came out to talk to us looked at our photos on the phone, and something changed in his expression. Not skepticism, something else. Something like recognition. "You need to get out of town," he said quietly. "Tonight, just go." "What do you mean?" I asked. "There are things in those woods that people don't understand," he said. "Things that are better left alone. If you got away, you're lucky. That's all I'm going to say." We left. We drove through the night back to the city. Marcus didn't sleep the whole drive. Neither did I. For the first few months afterward, I had nightmares. I'd dream about those figures at the edge of the forest, reaching for us with two long arms. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe me? Two hunters going crazy in the woods? It's a story people would laugh at. But here's the thing that I can't stop thinking about. 3 weeks ago, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. A photo that someone had taken of Marcus and me that afternoon on the ridge, watching the valley below. Someone had been close enough to photograph us, close enough to know where we were sitting, close enough to document us. I have no explanation for how that photo exists. I haven't heard from Marcus in almost 3 years. Nobody has. His family filed a missing person report, but nothing ever came of it. As far as I know, he's just vanished without a trace. And sometimes late at night, I'll get another text from that same unknown number. It's always a photo. A photo of my house from the street. A photo of my car. A photo of me at work. A photo taken from somewhere close, somewhere I didn't know I was being watched. There's a message that came with the most recent photo. It just said, "We're still waiting." Waiting for what? I have no idea. I've been hunting in the Oregon wilderness for 23 years. 23 years of pre-dawn hikes, of tracking elk through dense forest, of sitting motionless in the cold while the world wakes up around you. I've seen things out there that most people will never experience. Beautiful things, terrifying things. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened during the third week of October 5 years ago, on a remote ridge system about 40 miles northeast of Bend. The season had been sparse that year. Too many hunters, not enough game. I decided to venture deeper into the wilderness than I usually do, into an area I'd heard old-timers mention at the local hunting lodge, a place they called the Dead Zone. They said it had been logged decades ago and never quite recovered. No animals went there anymore. No birds sang. Even the insects seemed to avoid it. I thought it was superstition. I thought they were just being dramatic. I was so wrong. The drive alone took me nearly 3 hours on winding mountain roads that gradually became dirt tracks. By the time I parked my truck at the trailhead, the sun was already dropping low on the horizon. I should have turned back right then. That voice in your head that tells you something isn't right, I ignored it. I packed my rifle, my scope, my ammunition. I had a headlamp, a knife, and about 6 hours of daylight left. Or so I thought. The trail itself was barely visible, overgrown with brush and fallen branches that cracked beneath my boots like bone. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, The kind of quiet that feels wrong. No bird song. No rustling in the underbrush. No wind through the trees. Just the sound of my own breathing and my footsteps crunching through dead leaves. After about 2 hours of hiking, I came across the first sign that something was deeply off about this place. A deer. Fresh kill, maybe a day old, but it wasn't torn apart by a predator. Its neck was twisted at an angle that shouldn't have been physically possible. The head was almost completely reversed, facing backward like an owl. I knelt down to examine it, and my stomach twisted. There were no wounds, no bite marks, no claw marks. The flesh wasn't even torn. It was as if something had simply reached down and wrung the animal's neck with inhuman strength before leaving it there. I told myself it was a bear attack. Bears can do that, right? I wasn't sure if they actually could, but I needed to believe something rational had happened. I stood up, looked around at the dense trees surrounding me, and realized I couldn't see more than 30 feet in any direction. The forest was too thick, too dark, and it was getting darker by the minute. I should have turned back then. I should have walked back down that trail and gotten in my truck and driven away from that place. But I'd come this far. I'd taken time off work. I'd invested money in gas and supplies. I told myself it was just a deer, probably killed by a predator hours ago. Probably nothing to worry about. I kept walking. The forest grew even more oppressive as I climbed higher. The trees seemed to lean in toward me, their branches creating a canopy so dense that my headlamp barely penetrated the gloom. I was moving through something that felt less like a forest and more like the inside of something's body. The air was cold and wet, and there was a smell that I couldn't quite identify. Something like copper mixed with rot and something else. Something that made my primitive brain scream warnings. Then I saw the cabin. It shouldn't have been there. I didn't remember seeing it marked on any map, but there it was, about 50 yards off the trail, almost completely hidden by the overgrown vegetation. It was old. Really old. The wood was dark and weathered, the roof mostly caved in, but someone had been maintaining it. There was fresh wood stacked near the entrance, fresh wood, in a place that supposedly nobody came to. I approached it slowly, my rifle held across my chest. Every instinct was telling me to leave, to get out of there, but I had to know. I had to see. This is where I think my judgment really failed me. This is the moment I stopped being smart and started being foolish. The door creaked open before I even touched it, not blown open by wind. Deliberately opened, as if something inside was inviting me in. The interior was almost completely black. I clicked on my headlamp and what I saw made my blood go cold. The walls were covered in scratches. Deep, violent scratches gouged into the wood from floor to ceiling. Some of them seemed to form patterns. Some of them almost looked like they were trying to spell something. In the corner of the cabin, there was a makeshift bed made of branches and leaves, and scattered around it were bones. Small bones, dozens of them. Birds, mostly, but also bones that looked like they could have come from larger animals. Or maybe small animals. Or maybe, and this is where my mind really started to fracture, maybe something else entirely. I stumbled backward out of that cabin so fast I nearly fell. My heart was hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking. I pointed my rifle at the cabin door, though I had no idea what I thought I was going to shoot. There was something fundamentally wrong about that place, something that violated every sense of normalcy I possessed. I turned and walked back toward the trail, trying to move as quickly as I could without breaking into a full panic. That's when I heard it. A sound that I've never been able to properly describe to anyone. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't an animal call. It was something between the two. Something that sounded almost human, but with frequencies that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. It echoed through the forest from somewhere behind me. I ran. I know that running in the dark, in unfamiliar terrain, is one of the worst things you can do. But I ran anyway. I crashed through the underbrush, my headlamp bouncing wildly, my rifle banging against my chest. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the forest. Something big. Something that wasn't following any path, just plowing directly through the vegetation like it weighed hundreds of pounds and didn't care about obstacles. The sounds it was making. God, I still hear them sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. These horrible clicking noises mixed with that awful vocalization, like it was trying to communicate with me, like it was calling me to come back. I didn't stop running until I realized I was lost, completely and utterly lost. My trail was gone. The forest looked the same in every direction. I was so panicked I had to sit down on the cold ground and try to breathe, try to think, try to remember how to use a compass. My hands were bleeding. My clothes were torn. I was hyperventilating. That's when the sound stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the chase. I sat there in the dark, listening to nothing but my own ragged breathing, and I realized that I was being hunted. Not in a traditional sense. Not like a mountain lion stalking prey. This was different. This was intelligent. This was deliberate. Whatever was out there, it knew I was here, and it was playing with me. I managed to orient myself using the stars and my compass, and I started walking. Not running, walking. Every nerve in my body was on fire. Every sound made me flinch. Hours passed, real hours, 3 hours, maybe 4. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, and I began to wonder if I'd somehow walked in a circle and would end up back at that cabin. Then I saw lights, the lights of my truck parked at the trailhead where I'd left it. I've never been so relieved to see something in my entire life. I practically sprinted the last 100 yards. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I was starting the truck, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice water. There was a handprint on my driver's side window, a human-shaped handprint, but the proportions were all wrong. The fingers were too long, the palm was too wide, and the handprint was on the inside of the glass. On the inside. I didn't sleep that night. I drove through the darkness back toward civilization, my headlights cutting through the black forest, and I didn't slow down until I reached the outskirts of Bend. Even then, it took me a week to stop looking over my shoulder, 2 weeks to stop having nightmares, 3 weeks to tell anyone what happened. But here's the thing that really gets to me. About 6 months after this happened, I got a message from another hunter, a guy I didn't know. He'd found my contact information through a mutual acquaintance. In his message, he asked me if I'd ever hunted in the dead zone area. He said he'd been there too. He said he'd seen the cabin. He said he'd heard the sounds. He also said something else. He said that the handprint I saw on my truck window, he'd seen the same handprint. On his truck, on the inside of the glass, and he wanted to know what it meant. He wanted to know if I knew what had let him go. I never wrote back to him. I don't hunt in the Oregon wilderness anymore, and every time I hear wind through trees or a strange animal sound on the news, or see something in the darkness that doesn't quite make sense, I think about that cabin. I think about those bones. I think about that handprint on the inside of the glass, and I wonder if whatever was out there knew I was lost and helpless. Why did it let me go? What was it doing to those other hunters? And most importantly, what does that handprint mean? Is it a warning? Is it a mark? Is it a sign that I belong to something now, and it's just been waiting, patiently, for me to come back? I don't think I'm going back, but I'm not entirely sure that matters. Because lately, on cold nights when I'm alone in my house, I've started hearing those sounds again, those clicking noises, that terrible vocalization. And sometimes, when I look out my window into the darkness, I see a silhouette of something that shouldn't exist, standing just beyond the reach of my porch light. And I'm beginning to suspect that the dead zone doesn't just exist in the Oregon wilderness. I think it's been following me home. The thing about hunting in Oregon's deep woods is that you think you know what danger looks like. You prepare for bears, for getting lost, for hypothermia. You don't prepare for something that doesn't follow the rules of the forest. I'm going to tell you what happened to me in November of 2019, and I need you to understand that I've never talked about this publicly before. Not because I'm afraid of people thinking I'm crazy, though God knows they probably will, but because some experiences change how you see the world, and once you know certain things, you can't unknow them. I'd been hunting in the Cascades for over 20 years. I knew those woods like I knew the back of my hand. I had a spot about 15 miles northeast of Highway 58, deep enough that you rarely saw other hunters, quiet enough that the elk herds hadn't been completely spooked. That November, the weather had been mild, and I was feeling confident, maybe too confident. I set out before dawn on a Friday, alone. My buddy Dave was supposed to come with me, but he'd canceled last minute. I remember feeling annoyed about it, actually wishing he'd stuck it out. If he had been there, maybe things would have gone differently, or maybe we both would have ended up in that same situation. I don't know which possibility frightens me more. The hike in was uneventful. I got to my camping spot around 9 in the morning, set up my tent, and started glassing the ridges. The plan was simple: spend the day scouting, hunt the next morning, pack out by Sunday. I'd done this same trip a dozen times before. Around noon, I took a break and decided to explore a ravine I'd never been down before. This is the part where everyone always says, "That's where you went wrong." But at the time, it seemed harmless. I was restless, wanted to cover more ground. I grabbed my rifle and started making my way down into this deep cut in the landscape, where the trees were so thick that it felt like twilight even in the middle of the day. The air was different down there, colder. Even though it was only a few hundred feet lower in elevation, it felt like descending into a different world entirely. The ground was soft, covered in moss and years of accumulated needles. My boots made almost no sound. I was maybe 200 yards into the ravine when I saw the first marker. It was a piece of cloth, faded orange, the kind hunters wear, tied around a branch about 6 feet up. That was odd. Not impossible, but odd. Maybe someone had marked a trail years ago. I kept moving. 50 yards later, there was another one, and then another. Someone had deliberately marked a path through this ravine, and the markers looked recent enough. The cloth wasn't weathered to nothing, but it wasn't new either. Maybe a month or two old, I guessed. My heart rate picked up a little. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe another hunter had explored this area and marked his way back out. Still, something in my stomach was sending signals. Not quite fear, but awareness. The feeling you get when you realize you're not where you thought you were. I should have turned back. I didn't. The ravine opened up into a small clearing, maybe 40 feet across, surrounded by towering Douglas firs. And there, in the center of that clearing, was a structure I absolutely did not expect to find. It was made of branches and logs, roughly constructed, covered in dried moss and earth. At first I thought maybe it was some kind of old shelter, something from decades past. But the construction was too deliberate, too recently maintained. Someone had built this, and someone had maintained it. The entrance was low, barely waist height. I could see darkness inside. I should have gone back. Everything in my body was screaming at me to turn around and head back to camp. But there was something almost hypnotic about that place. An awful curiosity that overrode the instinct to leave. I've thought about that moment 1,000 times since, tried to understand why I didn't listen to my own survival instinct. I approached the structure slowly, rifle held loose in my hands. I called out, not shouted, but called out in a normal tone. "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded small in that clearing, swallowed by the trees. No response, just the sound of wind through the branches above, and my own breathing. I crouched down and looked inside the shelter. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness. What I saw made my blood go cold. Inside were blankets, dozens of them, stacked and layered. There were cans, food containers, and there were clothes hanging from the wooden beams of the structure's interior. But what made my skin crawl was what was on the walls. Photographs. Dozens and dozens of photographs, pinned and pasted to the wooden surfaces. I leaned in closer, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might come through my ribs. The photographs were of animals, deer mostly, but not just any photos. These were photos of dead animals, close-ups, detailed shots of wounds and exposed flesh. There were also sketches, crude drawings of the deer with arrows pointing to different parts of their bodies, and notes written in what looked like obsessive handwriting. Lines of text I couldn't quite make out from where I was crouching. I realized my hands were shaking. This wasn't a shelter. This was something else. This was a place where someone had been documenting something, obsessing over something. The level of detail, the amount of time that would have taken to collect and arrange all of this, it suggested someone who had been here for a long time. That's when I heard the sound. It was subtle, almost musical, but wrong, like someone was humming, but not quite human. The sound was coming from deeper in the ravine, further down the slope from where I was. It was the kind of sound that bypasses your rational mind and activates something primal, something that lives in the oldest part of your brain. I stood up quickly, almost losing my balance. The humming stopped. I told myself to get out. I was already turning toward the tree line when I heard the voice. "You found my place." The words were soft, calm, almost gentle. The voice belonged to a man, I thought, but there was something off about the tone. Something that didn't quite sound like normal human speech patterns. I spun around. There was a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by shadow. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or 3, and he was wearing camouflage gear that was so covered in dirt and moss and debris that he looked almost like a part of the forest itself. His face was obscured by shadow and what looked like mud or paint. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said, trying to keep my voice level. I still had my rifle, held loosely. "I was just exploring." "Exploring," he repeated, as if testing out the word. "That's a nice word for it. Most people just call it trespassing." I took a step backward. "I'll leave, no problem at all." "You know about hunting," he said. "Not a question, an observation. I can tell by the way you move. You know how to be in the woods. You respect it." Something about this statement terrified me more than if he'd threatened me directly. The casual way he said it, the clinical observation of my movements and behavior, it was like being assessed as prey. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I should really get back to camp." "You want to see something?" he asked. He was still partially in shadow, and he hadn't moved from his spot. "I can show you something most people never get to see. It took me 15 years to understand it, but I think I've finally figured it out." "I'm good," I said. I was taking longer strides backward now, trying not to turn my back on him. My rifle was getting raised, not in a threatening way, just instinctively. He moved then, fast. Faster than someone that size should be able to move. He covered half the distance between us in 2 strides, and I saw his face for the first time. His eyes were wrong. They were too wide, too aware, reflecting light in a way that didn't match normal human eyes. His mouth was twisted into something that might have been a smile, but it extended too far, and there was something wrong with the proportions of his face, like someone had taken a human face and rearranged the features just slightly off from where they should be. I raised my rifle. Stop right there." He stopped. He actually stopped, like I'd given him a command he had to obey, but that smile stayed on his face. "I've been watching the hunters," he said softly, "for a long time, documenting their patterns, understanding their movements. You all come through here season after season, and you never see me. You never see what I'm learning." "What are you talking about?" I asked, but I already knew. Deep down, I already knew what he was talking about. "The animals don't just run randomly," he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "There's a pattern to it, a purpose. They're being hunted, just like you hunt them, but by something bigger, something that understands strategy, and I've been trying to understand what that something is." The way he was looking at me, it was like I was suddenly very interesting to him, like I'd just become part of his study. "I'm leaving," I said. I turned and started moving toward the trees. I could hear him behind me, but he wasn't chasing. He was just following. "You don't believe me," he called out. "But you will. You've already started to see the patterns now. Every strange track, every kill that doesn't make sense, every time you feel watched in these woods, you'll know it's not just paranoia. You'll know it's real, and you'll come back to figure it out. They always do." I didn't come back to the ravine. I broke camp that night and hiked out in the dark, using my flashlight even though it made me an easier target. For what? I don't know. I haven't been back to those woods since. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. He was right about one part. I did start seeing patterns. Deer kills that were too clean, too precise. like they'd been studied and taken down with surgical accuracy. Fresh marks on trees that looked almost deliberate, almost like language, and tracks. Massive tracks that didn't match any known animal, sometimes appearing and disappearing as if their maker had just stopped existing. And I'm not the only one. I've found forums online, hidden discussions, other hunters talking about the same things, the same observations, the same realization that something in Oregon's deep woods is very wrong. The worst part is that I sometimes wonder if that man is still out there, still documenting, still watching, and if he ever finished whatever it was he was trying to understand. Because if he did, if he figured out what's hunting in those woods, then he knows something I desperately don't want to know. Last week, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph, a recent photograph of me, taken in my backyard through my window. On the back, written in that same obsessive handwriting I'd seen in the ravine, it said, "You're still thinking about it. Good. Come back soon. I have so much more to show you." I haven't left my house since.